Welcome to the Gettysburg National Military Park Cemetery. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you all tonight. On November 19, 1863, Gettysburg College, then Pennsylvania College, closed, and the students, faculty, and administrators processed down Baltimore Street. While the buildings and scenery may have changed, the same sense of community and unity exists today, perfectly captured in the words of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Tonight we have come here to relive that historic moment. Some of you may have studied the Gettysburg Address in high school, most likely unaware that you would attend a school with such close ties to that now very distant conflict. Although recited long ago, the Gettysburg Address is still prevalent in our world, most notably after September 11th, when it was referenced to provide solace to victims and their families. Hopefully you remember the words of Abraham Lincoln and allow them to guide you throughout your next 4 years at Gettysburg College. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the Mayor of the Borough of Gettysburg, the Honorable Mayor William Troxell.
Good evening. As the Mayor of Gettysburg, and also as a member of the Gettysburg College class of 1950, it's a great pleasure for me to be able to welcome you to Gettysburg this evening. Gettysburg is a very well-known town all over the Americas, and it's often called the best-known small town in the world. The town is known for 3 very important historical events: the Battle of Gettysburg, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and the home of Dwight David Eisenhower, the 34th President of the United States. The Battle of Gettysburg was the largest battle in the Great American Civil War, and over 100,000 Union and Confederate soldiers fought and died on our streets in Gettysburg and in the fields around the town. Our streets have echoed the shouts of heroes, the words of presidents, and the accolades of dignitary. For on our very doorsteps here in Gettysburg, the course of world history was changed forever. During the battle, the armies fought over the grounds at Gettysburg College, and men fought there and died there on those grounds, fighting for ideals which they believed in and for which they were willing to sacrifice their lives. The cupola on Pennsylvania Hall, that's the big white building right in the center of the campus. The cupola on that building was used as an observation post by the armies, and the building itself was used as a hospital where many men suffered and died. Of the 160,000 soldiers that fought in the Battle of Gettysburg, 51,000 of them, 51,000 were casualties, and 1 out of every 3 men that fought there was either dead, wounded, or missing. The battle lasted only 3 days, but more men were killed in the Battle of Gettysburg in those 3 days than were killed in the entire Iraq War that lasted for 7 years. The battle ended in a victory for the Union Army, but in a sense it was a victory for all Americans because it gave us the opportunity to continue to live together as a nation united. Historians often remind us that the nation was founded in Independence Hall in Philadelphia in 1776. And they remind us also that the nation was preserved in Gettysburg in 1863. The November after the battle, Abraham Lincoln came to Gettysburg and delivered his Gettysburg Address. That address is considered as one of the greatest speeches in American history, and it's acclaimed worldwide today. Tonight, during your walk to this cemetery, you walked on those very same streets where soldiers fought and died. You walked on the very same streets that Abraham Lincoln followed to the cemetery to deliver his Gettysburg Address. And for the next 4 years, you will also be living and walking on those very same streets. And from this day forward, your name will always be associated with the name Gettysburg. For your resumes, your transcripts, and your diplomas will all attest that you attended and graduated from Gettysburg College, one of the finest colleges in the United States. And I also want you to know, during your years as a student in Gettysburg, The doors of my office at the Gettysburg Borough Hall will always be open to help you or assist you if you need us. And tonight, as a token of our welcome, I will present your class with a key to Gettysburg. And AJ, a member of your class, will receive the key for you. Now, AJ, this key is given to you and your class as a symbol of our welcome. Please place it somewhere on the campus in a prominent position so the students can see it from time to time, and remember our wishes that you will have an enjoyable and successful student life here at Gettysburg College. And we hope we see you around many times. Very well.
Now I would like to introduce the 14th president of Gettysburg College, Janet Morgan Riggs.
Thank you, Allison. A special thank you to the National Park Service for making it possible for us to assemble here today on this sacred ground. Shortly after the Battle of Gettysburg ended in July 1863, plans were made to create a proper burial ground for the soldiers who'd been buried in shallow graves throughout the battlefield. As I mentioned earlier this evening, Attorney David Wills, a Gettysburg graduate of the class of 1851, at the request of the governor, purchased 17 acres to create the cemetery, and those 17 acres surround us here tonight. One of the nation's most well-known orators, Edward Everett, was the featured speaker at the formal cemetery dedication on November 19, 1863. Everett spoke for 2 hours. The next speaker, President Abraham Lincoln, followed with his Gettysburg Address. His remarks took 2 minutes. The Gettysburg Address is perhaps the greatest speech ever given. The 10 sentences composing the speech received little public attention at the time, though. But Edward Everett himself appreciated Lincoln's eloquence, and he wrote him, "I should be glad if I could flatter myself what I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes." And of course, over time, appreciation for the spirit and depth of Lincoln's short address has grown. To hear those words in this setting is a powerful experience. Tonight, I invite you to listen to the Gettysburg Address, delivered by Michael Burlingame, 2010 winner of the Lincoln Prize for his book, Abraham Lincoln, A Life, published by Johns Hopkins University Press. Professor Burlingame's 2-volume set takes a comprehensive look at Lincoln's life, from growing up impoverished in rural Kentucky and Indiana to building a career as an ambitious politician that led him become the 16th President of the United States. Nothing is off limits in Burlingame's book, from private sorrows to public disasters, as he tells the whole story of our 16th President. A graduate of Princeton University, Professor Burlingame received his PhD from Johns Hopkins University and taught history for 33 years at Connecticut College. He retired in 2001 as Professor of History Emeritus. But apparently retirement didn't agree with him, because he joined the faculty at the University of Illinois at Springfield in 2009. It is an honor to have him here with us tonight on this special occasion, and it is my pleasure to introduce him to you. Please welcome Professor Michael Burlingame.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction, Professor Riggs. I'm delighted to be here. I have many friends on the faculty at Gettysburg College. I have come here on many occasions, but none quite this special. And now I'd like to share with you the Gettysburg Address and then a couple of other statements by Lincoln that I think may be of interest to you. And here's what President Lincoln said on November 19th, 1863, on this spot. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come together to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. it is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember, what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that the nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Now, the Gettysburg Address is often thought of as Lincoln's greatest speech. And those of you who have been to the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., which I hope you all will, if you haven't already done so, avail yourself of the opportunity to do since you're so close to Washington. As you enter that temple and stand before the magnificent enthroned statue of Lincoln, you will notice on the left wall the full text of the Gettysburg Address. But on the right wall is the text of an equally great speech, the second inaugural address. And I'd like to share with you a passage from that speech, which is truly remarkable. In that passage, Abraham Lincoln grappled with a question that had been on his mind for some time. Namely, why is the Civil War so long? Why is it so bloody? Why have so many men died? Why have so many widows and orphans been created? Lincoln, like almost all other Americans, thought that the war would be short, that the bloodshed would be relatively small. But it turned out to be vast. 620,000 men died in the Civil War. That's as many as died in all the other wars in American history combined, from the Revolution through Korea. If you take all the war dead from the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, and Korea, and add them up, you get 620,000. If an equivalent number of Americans were killed today, the total would be 6 million. And Lincoln pondered. He didn't understand why the war was so long and so bloody. And one day in the White House, he wrote a memo to himself as he tried to clarify his thinking about this subject. And in it he said that the will of God prevails, but, and I paraphrase here, he didn't understand what was on God's mind. Why should this war go on so long? God could have stopped the war before it began. He could have stopped it at any point he saw fit, but he allows it to go on and on and on, and more men die, and I don't understand why. Well, on March 4th, 1865, as he delivered his second inaugural address, he offered an answer to that question, not in a private memo, but to the whole world. And here's what he had to say. The Almighty has his own purposes. And then he quoted from Jesus in the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Woe unto the world because of offenses. For it must needs be that offenses come, but woe unto that man by whom the offense cometh. Lincoln went on to say, if we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses, which in the providence of God must needs come, but having passed through his appointed time, he now wills to remove it. And that he gives to both North and South this terrible war as the woe due unto those by whom the offense came. Shall we discern therein any departure from those attributes which believers in a living God have always ascribed to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. But if God wills that it continue, until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As it was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the ways of the Lord are righteous and just altogether. I thank you for your attention.